Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it.
It's now 27 years ago, in the thickets next to the Nyando River in western Kenya, that the smouldering body of a man was found by a local herdsboy one Tuesday morning. The body belonged to Robert Ouko, Kenya's Minister of Foreign Affairs. He had been shot once, in the head. His right ankle was broken in 2 places, his body doused with diesel and set on fire. News of Ouko's grisly death spread rapidly. It's become one of those unsolved murder stories that are tightly woven into Kenya's history. All these years later, there are still serious misunderstandings about the circumstances of Dr. Ouko's death. At the foot of Alila, near Robert Ouko's Koru farm, there's a line of trees. It's an unfinished memorial that's supposed to mark the spot where the minister's body was found. It's in the wrong place. Even the date of death on Ouko's grave is incorrect. Who killed Robert Ouko and why has to date remained a mystery. You might think you know this story, but what follows is going to surprise you.
There were lots and lots of issues which I should be investigating, which I couldn't do. So I wanted to take it further and complete my investigation to a satisfactory result.
No policeman, either Troon or other policeman from UK, ever approached me.
She told me, young man, the things you have in the book, The Night Bob Died, are mostly fiction. The gentlemen who may have murdered my husband are not the ones you said murdered him.
I never had any row with him. I never had any quarrel with him. We never quarreled with him at all.
If I was asked to speculate, my speculation would be that perhaps the molasses issue was peripheral to the motives for the killing of Dr. Robert Ouko.
Robert lived quite near here, and he was a good friend. We didn't socialize a lot, but whenever I saw Robert, we had a chat, and what I liked about him, so informal. He'd walk in here at breakfast time and be having breakfast, and he'd sit and have a cup of coffee. So I've come to borrow a paintbrush, or I've come to ask you to lend me your plumber. I've got a water leak in the house, that sort of thing. And he was a really nice chap.
He was a quintessential scholar in my estimation. I learned a lot from him, and many of us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did learn a lot from him.
He had a lot of wealth of experience in diplomacy, even at the time where he became a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
By 1990, the world was changing rapidly. With the collapse of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, the global divide between communist East and capitalist West finally broke down. 3 months later, Nelson Mandela was released from 27 years in prison as South Africa's apartheid regime began to crumble. From the late 1980s, Kenyans themselves had been agitating for multi-party democracy.
For me, 1988 is a key turning point in Kenyan history. That's when Moi and KANU rigged the one-party elections. That's when we see the beginnings of mass opposition, a really effective multi-party movement. That's when we also see Moi really clamping down. And that's when the donors come in and say, hang on a minute, we can't be giving money to a guy who's willing to commit those kind of atrocities in order to stay in power. And that's the point, I think, that the tide really starts to turn.
That is when now there was a wind of change. That is when we started getting a sympathetic hearing. And of course, by sheer coincidence, then we had people like Smith Hemstones, who was the American ambassador to Nairobi, right-wing Republican, but very, very decisive and speaking in very forcefully. Now that the Cold War, the United States government was interested all of a sudden in promoting human rights.
But President Moi could at least rely on the eloquent Dr. Robert Ouko to defend the KANU government against the calls for change.
If that is inheritance, then I have to learn a little more English.
One of the best advocates for the Moi regime was Dr. Ouko. And he just come back from, I think, Norway, where he had performed very well in making the best of a bad situation, defending this government about the torture that was going on.
Yesterday there was an article in the press in Norway which says, according to Amnesty International, there are still in detention 50 political detainees. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen of the press, that in simple language is called a lie.
In January 1990, President Moi and a delegation of 83 ministers and civil servants flew to Washington to attend a prayer breakfast hosted by President George Bush. They returned 8 days later on the afternoon of Sunday, 4th of February. That evening, Dr. Ouko visited the home of Hezekiah Oyugi, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. What they discussed is not known for certain. At 9 the next morning, Ouko went to see President Moi at State House in Nairobi. At 5 that afternoon, Ouko left for Kisumu with his driver and bodyguard in his official Mercedes. His wife Christabel remained at their Loresha home in Nairobi. Dr. Ouko was due to fly on an official visit to the Gambia on the night of 14th February. He told his wife that they would drive from Koru to Nairobi 2 days before. But at the last moment, Ouko changed his plans. He told his wife that he would take the evening flight from Kisumu and that she should travel by car as planned, which she did at about 3 p.m. on Monday 12th. She was never to see her husband alive again. Here is where Robert Ouko spent his final hours. It's his farmhouse in Koru near Muhoroni. At around 8:30 on the evening of February 12th, he received 4 guests, including his sister, Dorothy Randiak. It was an historic night. They watched television coverage of Nelson Mandela's release from prison.
Chieng' Ouko lal, esechete ne wan kode ei dala kanyo. Ma ochopo saa 2:30 mar otieno. Wuode gine chief ng'ane Peter Kasuku gotieno gor gi Direpe gi Agnes manyamin Ouko Dorothy nikech iluongo Dorothy Randiak ne dhi nyime.
At about 10 p.m., as the guests were leaving, Dorothy Randiak noticed that the outside door to Ouko's study was open, so she instructed Selina to lock it. Between about 11 p.m. and 2 in the morning, according to staff testimony, Dr. Ouko asked for the keys to the 2 pedestrian gates leading to the farm. This was odd, as he had keys to both. Later, the maid Selina said she was woken up by what sounded like a door being slammed. From witness testimony, sometime before dawn on the morning of February 13th, 1990, a car came to the compound. Whether he got inside, we can't be certain. But by the time the car left, Ouko himself was gone. Selina said that she saw a white car with its lights on, heading out and turning left towards Muhoroni.
We talked a lot to the maid, and we also talked later on to the guards. We were told that relatives had visited him, and they had talked, and then they had left. 3, 4 o'clock, and a white car came, and Ouko left with it. You know, he took a few things and left with this car. And that was the last they saw of him.
This is the road Dr. Ouko came down in the last few minutes of his life. The road today is hardly any different from what it was 27 years ago. As you can see, it's very narrow, it's very windy, and it's very bumpy. Most significant of all, there are no lights anywhere in the vicinity. What does this tell you? It tells you that whoever came down this road in pitch darkness must have had some acquaintance with the local territory. This is not the kind of road you come down at night if you don't know where you're going. This is the foot of Alila Hill. Ouko was most likely driven here. It is just possible but highly unlikely that he walked from his farm. He then made his way across this field towards a river over there. Either he was running away from his assailants or being dragged against his will, we don't know. What we do know is that his right ankle was broken badly somewhere around this time, and then someone shot him once in the head. All this happened just 2 kilometers from Ouko's farm. Later that morning, a teenage herdsboy, Paul Shikuku, saw smoke rising from the scrub. He walked towards it. He had just discovered Ouko's burning body. Shikuku took fright and went to report what he had seen to the local villagers. On the evening of Tuesday 13th, local assistant chief Joseph Kiprano Arapsaina got an unexpected visit from some villagers. They told him that a herdsboy had found a burning body near Alila.
Ko charga ni tinuni ne 5 liters ko toji tinuni ne bo yemut spotlight ke ba na tur ko gimi ta jagat a briefcase a kambu ko yoru wole yoru ger barak lying in the back. Kogi taguni kogi gal kilale iye na nyali le nigeri le kole iye smoke, blue smoke.
The alert that Dr. Ouko was missing was only finally raised by officials in his ministry when Ouko failed to turn up to Nairobi airport to travel to the Gambia. Late that night, as news filtered out that Ouko was missing, his wife Christabel left Laresha for Koru in the company of James Onyango Koyo, the minister's youth campaigner. Later that day, the news of his disappearance was broadcast to the nation. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Thursday 15th, 2 days after he had left his farm, the Kenyan police began a search for Dr. Ouko within the Koru area. At about 10:30 on the morning of the 16th, a police whistle was heard. The burnt body of Dr. Robert Ouko had been found at the foot of Alila, some 2 kilometers from his farm. A short while later, Jonah Nguka, the DC for Nakuru, who had also gone to the Koru farmhouse, took a telephone call from his wife Susan, Ouko's personal assistant. Mrs. Ouko was in a nearby room in a private conversation with a CID officer when Nguka entered and told her the news that her husband had been found dead. At this, one witness said Mrs. Ouko collapsed screaming in grief. At the same time, Vincent Obari, then Kenya's ambassador to West Germany, happened to be visiting Ouko's office in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
A news came through, that is now from the personal assistant of the minister, that Dr. Robert Ouko's body had been discovered. Well, that was not news for me. I felt lost, confounded, astonished, angered, I stormed out of the office. I went back to my hotel room. I called the district commissioner for Nakuru, John Anguka. John Anguka is the husband of the minister's personal assistant, Susan Anguka. So he said, you drive over to Nakuru in the morning tomorrow, come to my place, then we will drive together to Ouko's place. Well, it was a depressing sight, very, very depressing indeed. I saw the body, but it was depressing. I couldn't take it, but that I had to learn to live with it, and I have learned to live with it, because Bob is no more.
As the news of Dr. Ouko's death spread, there were demonstrations in Nairobi and Kisumu. President Moi acted quickly. Over that weekend, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was in urgent contact with the British Foreign Office asking for the help of the British police. Early on Monday the 19th, Detective Superintendent John Troon of New Scotland Yard arrived at his office in London to be summoned by his boss.
I was called up to see my commander at about 10 o'clock on that Monday morning and saying there's been a death of a Kenyan foreign minister, and it's come through diplomatic channels. They need someone out to investigate it, and you're number one in the frame, so the job is yours. I had no experience of Africa. I'd never been to Africa except for North Africa, Morocco, but the investigative process was exactly the same as anywhere else. I arrived there, yes, about 3 days after the body had been discovered.
The British team of detectives, together with Dr. Ian West, a forensic pathologist, were received at Nairobi Airport by Jonah Anguka, the district commissioner for Nakuru, and one Alexander Oyolo, described as a senior protocol officer from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
I was met at the airport, airside, by a contingent of Kenyans, but no police officers, which is terribly unusual because normally you would have police officers meeting police officers. We were taken to the Intercontinental Hotel, wash and brush up, and then we were taken to see Oyugi in his office.
Hezekiah Oyugi was a permanent secretary in Kenya's Ministry of Internal Affairs. He was a powerful man, feared by many.
Hezekiah Oyugi was head of the public service. He was a prime minister, if you like, in everything other than name. You know, literally, if he wanted to know what was eaten in a particular homestead in any corner of this country the evening before, he would get to know.
Ian West, Dr. Ian West, who's a pathologist that I took with me from the UK, discuss issues with the chief medical officer, and we immediately, that afternoon, undertook a second post-mortem on the body of Dr. Ouko. There was at least 20 people there from the Kenyan government side, which should not have been there in the first place, but they were. But they included Anguka, they included Kaviti, the government pathologist at that time, and lots of others, but they kept back. This PM went on for 4 hours or so. The state of the body was an awful state. All the chest area had disintegrated and gone, where they had poured diesel fuel over it and set it alight. Of course, diesel takes a long, long time. It's not like petrol will go woof. Diesel will just burn slowly through the body.
Dr. West's forensic examination found that Ouko had been killed by a single shot to the head. In West's view, the damage done to the skull was more than he would have expected from a standard round fired from a .38 revolver found at the scene. Dr. Ouko's body had been set on fire after death when the body was lying down. The legs and body had been severely burnt, but not the face. West also found a 3-inch bruise on Dr. Ouko's right arm. Perhaps more significantly, he found a double break on the lower tibia and fibia, just above his right ankle. And intriguingly, a single Caucasian hair was found loosely associated with a partially burnt handkerchief found at the scene.
Although, in my opinion, it is impossible to absolutely exclude suicide, The indications are, from pathological findings, that the deceased was shot by another individual after breaking his right ankle, possibly as the result of a fall whilst trying to escape. In my opinion, the suspicious death of Dr. Ouko should be investigated as one of homicide.
We had a meeting that evening with Oyugi, and the commissioner was there then, and Guka was there, and a few others in Oyugi's house. And I specifically said to Oyugi that, as far as we are concerned, there is evidence to suggest that Dr. Ouko was murdered. He did not commit suicide. And Oyugi quite forcibly said to me, "Mr. Troon, you are wrong. The minister committed suicide." And I said, "I'm sorry, sir, but no, the evidence suggests quite contrary. He was murdered. And either I'll investigate the murder or I'll go back to London, let you get on with it." That's what I specifically said to him.
The next day, Troon and his team arrived at the scene of the murder near Alila in Koru. They were accompanied by Jonah Nguka, Alexander Oyolo, and Superintendent Philip Magero, who was to become the local police liaison officer with Troon's team. By the time they got to the site, it had already been badly contaminated. There had been heavy rain, and many people had walked all over the site. But they did discover a mark on a branch a few feet from where Ouko's body had been found. This was later confirmed to be a bullet mark. They then drew lines of string to show the trajectory the bullet could have taken in relation to the position of Dr. Ouko's body. These findings, together with a post-mortem, supported the view that Dr. Ouko's body could have been moved after he was shot, but crucially, given the blood flow on his face and the position of the body in relation to the bullet mark on the branch, moved by only a few feet. Troon's conclusion was emphatic.
There is no evidence to suggest that Dr. Ouko had died at any other venue than the scene, although, as stated previously, he could have been injured or incapacitated elsewhere.
Here are two facts that we know right from the beginning. The charred remains of Dr. Ouko were discovered on the morning of 13th February 1990, and it is certain that he was killed where the body was found. We know this from the testimony of his housemaid, the herdsboy who found the body, and above all, the forensic evidence of the British pathologist who investigated the murder site. The idea that he was killed somewhere else and the body brought here is fiction. For the next 3.5 months, Troon headed the investigation into Ouko's murder. In early June, Troon delivered an interim report on his findings to Kenya's Commissioner of Police, Philip Kilonzo. He then returned to London and spent the next 2.5 months writing his final report. He signed it off on the 28th of August. This he delivered in person to Kenya's Attorney General Matthew Guy Muli in Nairobi on Monday 24th September 1990. In his final report, Troon considered but eliminated suicide as a cause of Dr. Ouko's death. As to a motive for Dr. Ouko's murder, he also eliminated general crime, a problem with other women or an irate husband, local government corruption or politics, or any sort of personal vendetta. But he did suggest two possible motives for the murder that should be further investigated.
I have eliminated all possible motives, with the exception of some allegations of corruption within government circles and the possibility of a severe dispute during the Washington visit.
Troon's final report became the basis for all of the later investigations into Dr. Ouko's murder. But did Troon get it right? Was he the great sleuth sent by the British government to solve the crime? Or was his final report fatally flawed, as some have claimed? Troon himself accepted that he had not completed his investigation.
My final report, really, is not a final report. It's a report leading up to a certain period when I had to get out. There were lots and lots of issues which I should be investigating, which I couldn't do, because I wanted to take it further and complete my investigation to a satisfactory result.
For 27 years, John Troon's final report has provided the basis for so many theories as to why Robert Ouko was killed. But in it, Troon himself said that his work was now complete. He called for further investigations either to endorse or eliminate some of the lingering doubts experienced at the time. And that's exactly what we've done. With the help of thousands of pages of testimony, much of it previously unseen, using interviews with many of the people involved, we've dug further than ever before into the murder of Kenya's Minister of Foreign Affairs on the 13th of February, 1990, all to find an answer to the question, who killed Dr. Robert Ouko and why? You may think you've heard this story, but have you heard the truth?